But let's talk about this first story we got from timcast.com. New Mexico man acquitted of charges related to January 6th. The federal defense contractor is the first person to be found not guilty of all charges filed against him in connection to the Capitol security breach. Matthew Martin, a federal defense contractor, was acquitted on April 6 following a 2-day bench trial. Martin had been charged with entering and remaining in a restricted building, disorderly and disruptive conduct in a restricted building, violent entry and disorderly conduct in a Capitol building, and parading, demonstrating, or picketing in a Capitol building. U.S. District Judge Trevor N. McFadden said that the first charge of entering and remaining in a restricted building was a close call, but that there was a reasonable doubt whether Martin knew he was entering a restricted building. McFadden also said the government failed to show evidence of Martin crossing the police line, which mobs of protesters had broken before he had arrived at the Capitol. During his April 5th testimony, Martin said he went with the flow. So here we are. This is fascinating. For the people who tore down the barricades, tore the signs down, attacked cops, well, of course, they're going to get convicted. Yep. There's video evidence of them attacking people. But we've long maintained that there is reasonable doubt for those, the MAGA memas, they call them, who fumbled and bumbled their way into the building as police fanned them in. So, can I say I was right? I was right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct.
I was right. Andrew Klavan agrees. Because I said this back in January.
Andrew Klavan's seal of approval.
You know, it's very rare that federal cases go to trial because people are so terrified by the federal government, because the federal government doesn't mess around. When they put you away for 15 years, you stay away for 15 years. There's no time off for good behavior. So when they come to you and they say, well, we'll give you 4 years instead, people confess and they plead guilty. But you just don't have to do it, especially if there was, as in this case, there was video of the guy being let in.
That's right.
Yeah.
And this is the video that we referenced back in January, where you see the door open. And then there's actual audio where you can hear a cop say, I don't agree with it, but I respect it, or something like that. That's a cop.
Yeah.
You got cops taking selfies with protesters. So this is the third trial. There's been one jury trial and 2 bench trials. The bench trial with Judge McFadden, I believe his name is McFadden. The guy was acquitted on the charges of disorderly or whatever. He was like, just entering isn't disorderly, so acquitted. But you did, climb up an outer wall and you knew you weren't supposed to be in there, so you're getting trespassed.
Right.
But what's that really going to be? The entire January 6th narrative is in the gutter at this point.
Well, what you have that disconnect between the Democrats' narrative and what happened. What happened was bad. I don't think you should charge into the Capitol. I don't think you should make our Congress people afraid, except of being unelected. But they've turned it into the Reichstag fire. They've turned it into the biggest emergency that ever hit the country, and now we need now every Republican is supposed to feel like a criminal, and that's ridiculous.
Let's look. Let me pull up the CNN headline real quick. This is how CNN frames it. Man who said January 6th was magical acquitted in U.S. Capitol riot case. You see, this is why people don't understand what's happening in the world, because when you see that headline and you're a CNN reader or viewer, you assume this guy is a rioter who is violent. They called it a riot case. He said it was magical, but they don't give you the context in the headline.
Right, of course. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. You mentioned earlier the fact that the federal government tends to convict. I think their prosecution rate is something above 95% because, like you said, people are usually willing to take plea deals. And it's not as if they're sitting there messing around looking for reasons to let somebody off. They weren't able to convict this guy because there was reasonable doubt whether he intentionally trespassed. And there have been at this point dozens, if not hundreds of people who were there who have repeated this narrative that they were waved in by the police. They did not know they weren't supposed to be there. Obviously, people who broke in, who legitimately trespassed, who broke down the barriers like you mentioned, those are criminals. But there are many people who thought that they were allowed to be there based on the conduct of the police. And so for the Young Turks to come smear you because you
smeared my good name,
smeared the good name, besmirched the good name of Sir Timothy Cast over his prediction, which turned out to be correct, is frankly hilarious. They own themselves.
What gets me really is that the process is the punishment in this situation. Did this guy sit in solitary for a year like a lot of these other people?
Probably.
So he's like in a state of mind where he's like, I'm going to take it to court because I got nothing left to lose at this point. If they're going to leave me in jail for a year without due process. I'm not trying to rain on this because this is great news. This is really good news, and it's definitely an indication that a lot more acquittals are coming.